we've got some version of ISIS killing, murdering people at this venue, and Vladimir Putin blames Ukraine for this.
It's a tangled web, I would say, because by all accounts, it was ISIS that did this. And ISIS-K is an offshoot. It's ISIS Khorasan, which is an area in Afghanistan, which is kind of where they grew up. They were antagonistic with the Taliban. In fact, they were actually formed by many of the Taliban in the latter stages of that war that were not radical enough. Taliban was not radical enough for some of these guys, so they formed an offshoot of ISIS because, they were the most bloodthirsty, literally cutting people's heads off on camera kind of group that appealed to the uber violent group. And so they started forming that. And they've done a few high-profile attacks. They, of course, were the ones that were responsible for the August 2021 bombing at the Kabul airport that killed 13 Americans. They were responsible for the January of this year attack in Iran where there was a big group of people and 85 people were killed and hundreds of others were wounded. So they have history of doing a couple of big things. The issue, according to the Russians, and let me make sure I preface this, because according to the Russian side, this all began because of the involvement of Ukraine. They say that ISIS-K was used by them, and so there was an intermediary. Putin actually said last night their time in Moscow that it was Islamic terrorism, terrorist people that conducted it. But he says, but we're still doing investigations to find out who helped them, who funded them, and we will punish everyone from anywhere that had anything to do with it. And that's kind of laying the groundwork for, we believe that there was some involvement from the Ukraine side. And, as I've been saying a lot, it almost doesn't matter what really happened. What matters is what is Russia going to say happened and what are they going to do as a result? Because if we could come up all day long and say, yes, we have this forensic evidence that it was ISIS and only ISIS, which is what Ukraine is saying. But if Russia believes to be different, whether it was or wasn't, it's what are they going to do next that really matters for us.
Well, I guess whether or not, Ukraine hired out the thugs at ISIS-K to conduct this attack in order to disrupt the Russians, or ISIS-K did this on their own. Ultimately, ISIS-K is responsible for pulling the trigger and killing people. What's ISIS-K's point? What point are they trying to make? Why would they kill a bunch of innocent Russian civilians? I mean, was there a demand sent out? Has Russia interfered with ISIS-K to the point where this is, some sort of retaliatory action, like Israel going into Gaza after they got slaughtered? I mean, what's the point?
Right. That's actually part of the mystery to this, because there is no clear-cut answer. It's not like, well, ISIS has gone after Russia a few times. Let me point that out. They have had a few small-scale attacks against Russian targets over the years. So it's not completely unprecedented. But when you're talking about an attack of this magnitude in the capital city on civilian targets done in the way that they were doing here, then it is going to be a big problem for Russia. And they got to want to know, what was the motivation here? What does ISIS stand to gain from this as opposed to anything else? Because look, Russia was way down on the list of people that ISIS wants to hate, people that they want to attack. I mean, we still have bases in Iraq and in Syria openly dedicated to the destruction of ISIS. So if anyone was going to get hit, you'd think it would be a U.S. target. But that's part of the mystery. And frankly, part of the reason why the Russian people are saying this doesn't make sense, because we wouldn't be their priority target. Somebody else would. So since they did this extremely emotional target, on concert goers, I mean, there's no greater vulnerability than civilians just at a concert. And so, especially the Russian nation, this was for sure going to get them up. So that's part of why there's some confusion here on any side you want to look at it.
Well, I noted that France went on full alert and their highest level. It's like going code red here in the United States. I couldn't let our conversation on this horrific terrorist incident go by without pointing to our southern border and the millions and millions of folks who flowed in, many of them military age. We know from the four corners of the world, and the 1.5 million or so gotaways that we have no idea where they came from or why they're here. I mean, even our highest officials in intelligence are concerned that there may be a terrorist attack launched here in the United States. Do you have some concern about that, Daniel Davis?
Yeah, I think that on one of the previous shows that I was on, one of your shows, we talked about that there are so many people that are coming across our border, just flooding across in literal terms, and we don't know who they are or where they're going, and it almost doesn't make sense that our adversaries wouldn't want to exploit that and to get people inside our country for, I'm just theorizing here.
Yeah.
China, if something should happen in the future between China and Taiwan and we get involved, that they may have people planted that are prepared ahead of time to have actions against our military bases or our industrial capacity, all kinds of civilian targets even that would hamper our military ability. That's just one example. But, ISIS in this particular case, they didn't sneak somebody into Russia. They used electronic means to recruit them inside Russia. So they were already there. So they don't even need to do that. But if you can just walk across the border with your own guys, obviously that's a threat and a concern. And why I've been saying I don't care what immigration policy the politicians want to get to, secure the damn border.
Amen to that. And I'm glad you put an exclamation point on that because I would have if you hadn't. Now, insofar as Russia's war with Ukraine, I saw that Russia, I guess I could argue, finally attacked Ukrainian power supplies. I mean, critical infrastructure for the Ukrainian citizens. You and I have talked about this before, and given the overwhelming size of the Russian military, the assets they have relative to the size of Ukraine and their limited assets, it's almost as if Russia's been keeping their powder dry on this for the last couple of years. Where do you see this going now when they have launched some heavier attacks?
Yeah, I'm actually on our show tomorrow. We're going to have Doug McGregor on. We're going to talk about this. There is an incredible piece out right now on the RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, I believe it's called, where Alex Vershinin lays out, what he thinks is a modern way to how big states fight long-term wars. It's not these big wars of big arrow movements that some people talk about, but more methodical, smaller scale, relentless kinds of operations that will destroy an enemy's armed forces over time. The objective is not to get big territory here or make a big swath to take this city or that, but to slowly destroy the enemy's ability to field an army until one day it just breaks. And by all accounts, this is what Russia has been doing. Now then, the Ukraine army has been getting brittle. They don't have enough men to come up. Of course, everybody knows they don't have enough ammunition to stave off what Russia's been doing. So now that it appears they're in the pre-stages of a larger offensive. And so these missile strikes into the energy infrastructure, into their command and control centers, into their fuel depots, ammunition depots, everything to further weaken it so that if then a big manpower punch hits, it could break. And I think that's where this is headed.
You find it interesting that everybody's calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and yet I don't hear anybody screaming about a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, you mean other than me? I've been arguing for that to save the Ukraine. I know that's not at all what you meant, but I'm emphasizing it. Yes, that's exactly what we should be doing. All of the signs are there that this war not only cannot be won by Ukraine, but now will be lost by Ukraine if we don't take decisive action quickly. Diplomacy and statesmanship is the only thing that's going to save Ukraine. If we keep going with this fiction that we still do to this day, that, we just need a little bit more ammunition. We just need that $60 billion, as the president and nearly every politician in our country says, then it's going to change, and it's not going to change anything on the battlefield. Nothing, because that's not what's going to that's not what's going to determine winner or loss. It's $60 billion. People are focused on that like that's the end all. It's not even the beginning all. It's just going to be a drop in the bucket and won't change anything strategically. And the faster we come to that realization, the faster we can get a chance to stop the killing in Ukraine, stop the pointless slaughter of their men, and have a chance for Ukraine to have a future. The longer we go, the less chance there is of that.